All right, so today we're just gonna kind of wrap the climate resource section and then the climate effects on your other resources section of the class to wrap up our resources section of the class, the first third of our semester. We're gonna just basically summarize that, remind everybody that we've had a chance to take a look at what some basic, very coarse climate predictions in and around your park will look like, and we've started to imagine as of last week, what 60 years from now in the year 2080, what's life going to kind of look like at your park that you are trying to manage, and thinking about adjusting our management plans and procedures in the last 1/3 of the semester in light of that information. So we definitely don't want to ever get too far away from climate. It's going to be one of the defining dynamics of our generations. But we do need to move on. So with that preamble, let's tip over into the middle 1/3 of our semester. That is talking about the recreationists that you are nominally serving with providing good access to recreation opportunities, not necessarily handing them the recreation opportunities per se. So that not park rangers have business opportunities to provide some of those recreation opportunities with guided hunting and fly fishing trips, being the whale boat or the whale watch boat captain, and so on and so forth, or the canoe rental folks, and so forth. So that's an important distinction. That's going to help kind of scribe or define the boundaries of part of our mindset about not so much a service ethic as park rangers. We're not necessarily here to directly serve our recreating publics, plural, at your national park. We are here to make sure that folks can really best serve themselves. High quality recreation opportunities and experiences on their trip. Does that make sense? It's kind of splitting hairs super hard, but it's why you're generally not going on a Appalachian Trail through hike with a ranger the whole time. They're managing the facility. They're not necessarily shepherding you from one end to the other. Okay? So that's kind of again, kind of a subtle hair-splitting thing, but it's important to call that out at the beginning so we sort of understand why we go the direction we do with this part of the semester. All right, so we want to know about these recreationists, and we want to know as much as we can about as many of them as possible in, here's the kicker, a statistically representative way, because we are not dealing with a single group at a time like rec majors are in terms of adventure leadership or therapeutic recreation, not dealing with single recreationists, not dealing with single groups. We're dealing with folks kind of maybe up to 20 to 25,000 at a time at park units outside of the national capital, and on some super busy days at the national capital, we can peak out at 100,000 visitors on site that day, and that's a lot. So we just don't have a chance to get to know like everybody's hopes and dreams and their particular life way and so on and so forth. But we do need to know kind of where the center of mass is across lots of different people. And we also need to know the long tails, as statisticians call it. Where do we only have a few people way out at one end of any of the characteristic attributes we're talking about people along, because we need to make sure that we're not just managing for what one 1960s early recreation research study termed the average camper that doesn't exist. So if we figure out that our most typical camper is a 22-year-old, college in progress, not quite finished yet, adult, Caucasian, male, or whatever, and we sort of base all our management assumptions around that sort of portrait or vignette of a visitor, we're going to kind of miss everybody else and all of their needs that might differ in some valid ways from that white male, 20s visitor. Okay? So I want to know things about the individual, the group that they're with, and so for solo travelers, which are less common but more common than they used to be, we want to know about, so for their solo travelers, their group is going to be 1, and their group characteristics are the same as the individual. We also want to know about the trip characteristics. All right, so we'll start pulling all this apart today. Let's see. Talking about user characteristics first. I think the trip characteristics are mostly pretty self-explanatory. All right, so first off, basic demographics. All right, so what's somebody's age? That's a good proxy for all sorts of other things in terms of typical fitness capacity. Like if we have to make some kind of an educated guess on how far are hikers typically wanting to hike, we can base that off of, among other things, their age. All right, so distance traveled on a typical recreation day at a national park follows, it's not a symmetric bell curve, it's technically called what's graduate students would call a gamma distribution, so a non-symmetric bell curve. If you are 0 years old, you're not hiking very many miles. If you're 110 years old, you're not hiking many miles. But somewhere in the middle, we've got some typical age that tends to hike the most miles on a given day. Does that make sense? All right, so we're talking about this in terms of graphs and stuff like that because, again, we want to know about all 20,000 people that are on site at your park, if it's a busy park, or all 500 at a much less busy park at a given time. All 4.5 million across the course of that year, or maybe all 10,000 across the course of that year at some of these much, much less busy, less well-known places. Okay? So, age. What is their gender? And so, like good wildlife biologists, we want to draw the distinction between sex and gender. Sex is the plumbing that you have. Gender is what you express, right? What is your socio-demographic grouping factor, like race or ethnicity? Those things have a pretty strong and measurable effect on the kind of trip you might be showing up for. On average, again, we are not falling into stereotypes or anything, but this is useful information for helping us understand the variety and the meaningful variation we have across our visitors and so forth. Okay. We also want to know about things like what is kind of the range in socioeconomic status. Are people showing up with like $100,000 cash to blow on this trip? Or is somebody showing up with literally zero cash and a trunk with some beat up ramen packets, like tucked back behind the spare tire, and they're going to be scrounging? Very different situation, very different trip with otherwise identical demographics, potentially. Socioeconomic status is a big determinant of what you think you're capable of in terms of an on-site trip, like contracting a bunch of services to make your trip easier or more fun. What you view as rewarding in terms of your trip. So the things you might choose to pursue versus leave for another time, and so on and so forth. Okay? So, let's get a sense of the effect of demographics, just in a very loose sense, here among the class. So, show of hands, how many of you are less than 80 years old? Okay, cool. How many of you are 18 or older? All right, so within that window, you are much more likely to be self-determining the parameters of your trip versus somebody volunteering you what your trip is going to be like. Does that make sense? So the family trip, for example, and that gets into group characteristics, which we'll go after next. But a family trip to the Olympics is going to look a little bit different than, so a family with kids is going to look a little bit different than folks of the same age and other demographic factors that are just a romantic couple or just a solo traveler, or in that same sort of window, but arriving to a place like Mammoth Cave on our field trip as a part of a class group. Okay, so demographic factors. How many of you guys and gals have ever been camping and you slept in a tent that you brought? Tent that you brought, okay? How many of you have ever been glamping with a tent that you paid somebody else to bring? All right, so how was that trip different, Alyssa, than, for example, summer camp, where you were basically bringing your tent? So glamping is like, it's not a backpacking tent.
Would it count if it was like my parents' tent?
Well,
That's what I was thinking.
okay. So we call it basically yours for the purposes of this session. That makes sense, though. So glamping is, you show up and, you step off your helicopter and the chopper pilot leaves and says, "Have a good trip, old bean, pip pip cheerio," and they move the collective and fly off. And your tent is set up for you. It's got a wood floor raised up off the ground. There is insulation and there's bug netting wrapping the insulation. It is sort of proofed against gnawing rodents trying to get into your tent. And the tent itself might be 20 feet by 20 feet by 15 feet and has like a wood burning stove in there and like LED string lighting or rope lighting. And in the morning, if you should so choose, after you've enjoyed a wonderful night's sleep on a quilted down mattress, somebody will ring the little bell outside your tent and bring you fresh tea. 1 lump or 2, but they already know because you specified that before you arrived, or you had somebody specify it for you. You have people that do that sort of thing for you. You're busy, glamping. All right, that's a very different experience. It's a very different set of factors to accommodate if you are a park ranger between those two systems. So, for example, on summer camp this year, we drove by a couple of places that are glamping facilities, and it's a pretty well curated experience. Like the tents have USB ports so you can charge your phone, so you can, take your influencer pictures and blast it out to the gram so other people can, sort of not really enjoy their para relationship with you as an influencer and feel like you notice them, but you don't, you're just counting likes, whatever. So, demographics, socioeconomic status, strongly influences what you're going to go after. Socioeconomic status as a demographic factor also really impacts or is impacted by demographic shifts over time. So if you think of, if I say, imagine an American, what kind of a person do you see in terms of their demographic descriptors? What's the color of their skin? Or their skin tone or shade? What's their ethnic background? Is it somebody that's mostly like you? Or somebody really pretty different? So the answer to that question is, well, there are lots of answers to that question, but it changes over time. So for example, with the most recent, or before the most recent census, we get lots of pretty detailed information. This is county level information. This is a heat map, so more red means growth in a particular demographic group on a county by county basis. All right, so blue colors, cool colors, are loss in that particular demographic. This is a demographic heat map for change in self-reported Black or African American population here in the United States based on a previous census. All right, so for those of you listening from home, kind of the southern Gulf states have a lot of growth. And then there's like individual counties elsewhere that saw a little bit of growth, and upstate New York. So one county in Wyoming increased its African American population, and all of the rest were either neutral or dropping, which is to say basically zero already. Okay? So folks from different sort of race and or ethnic backgrounds here in the United States attach or tend to attach different sort of expectations and values, and race and ethnicity also have some relationship or correlation, not necessarily determination, but relationship to things like socioeconomic status. So, for a long time, when you take a look at and you record the numbers on everybody coming through the front gate at any arbitrary national park, you tend to see the demographics skewed towards Caucasian, towards professional degrees, so like doctor, lawyer, stuff like that, away from less than high school degrees, at a rate that's disproportional to the American population demographics as a whole. So parks are, you might say, sought out by certain kinds of people on average more commonly than other kinds of people here, and that generally holds true across other places with diverse visitation around the world as well. Folks who identify as like Latino, Latina, Latinx, Hispanic tend not to seek out national parks that are farther away from home, that are less developed. For example, they tend to show up, and we'll get into those trip characters, but they tend to show up in larger groups, larger family groups, and so forth. Some African American folks have reported that based on, through zero fault of the Park Service or the Forest Service or any land management agency per se, they have reported some concerns about not feeling perfectly safe going into forested park areas because of a long pattern in mostly the southeastern to southern central section of the United States where African American folks would disappear and their bodies would be found in the woods, lynched or shot in the back of the head kind of thing. And so that concern, healthy sense of self-preservation concern, propagates forward among generations and has had apparently a kind of a suppressive effect. Like, there's a lot of places on this map where the African American population is growing pretty hard. That's cool, right? More diversity is interesting. But they're not necessarily showing up at national parks. So, on the one hand, there's kind of the sense of, this is America, freedom to self-determine. If you don't feel like going on a vacation at a national park, that's fine, whatever. As long as you are choosing that because you have other good options, right? If it's from a sense of historic discrimination or a sense of a lack of personal safety at parks, which isn't automatically true, but the perception of it is a powerful shaping factor in the choices that we make. Well, we definitely want to know about that, right? So we collect a lot of this demographic type information, and we see that across certain activities, the population is getting older. And if the only people doing a particular recreation activity are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, kind of the boomer generation these days, well, that's a huge chunk of the population, but it's also a rapidly shrinking part of the population. A lot of these parks were set up and reached their maturity, so to speak, as the baby boomers were showing up to them and recreating in really pretty characteristic ways. So, using a camper, using a propane stove, trailering a small Jeep behind an RV. Those are really pretty characteristic of older Gen X and baby boomers. So, in addition to race and ethnicity, things like age structure of your visitors, so the proportion of visitors. So age of individual visitors gets built up into an age structure of all of your visitors, and it's basically a vertical bar graph. And if it's a bottom-heavy age structure, then you got a lot of young people. If it's a very top-heavy age structure, you got a lot of super old people and not a lot of young people. And you see different generations sort of move up the list as you look at these entrance statistics on a park-by-park basis over time. These things change over time. So, baby boomers mostly retiring. Young folks, youngs, getting outside, but not necessarily going as deep into wilderness in the same numbers with the same intensity as some previous generations in some ways. There are lots of open theories about that, and part of it has to do with cell phone reception. Like, what's the point of even going down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon if I can't live blog it? I mean, that's goofy to me, but I have blinders on. I'm a product of my generation, the millennials. And we grew up with computers. We were the first to grow up with computers, but we didn't necessarily grow up with smartphones and always-on connectivity and broadband in your pocket all the time. Okay? So, different generations think of natural places in different ways, as representing a different sort of bouquet of opportunities, so to speak. Has anybody ever seen an Instagram post of some highly filtered person with improbably white teeth, like, sprawled out in a field of wildflowers? Okay. That's a really pretty modern thing. Like, that's a recent thing. There was no real incentive to take that photo and send it out to up to millions of followers with a geo-tagged photo. Let everybody know where you can do that. Until recently. Okay? So we think about, based on our age, based on the technologies available to us at the time, based on prevailing socioeconomic factors, like wage erosion since the 1970s. Minimum wage hadn't been updated in a long time, and it's just harder for young people to make as much as their grandparents did, and stuff like that. Like, that's just a thing. So that affects where we go, how long we stay there, if we're glamping or bringing our own tent or just couch surfing at somebody's house nearby and then day tripping into the park versus, paying $500 a night for a nice lodge room in Yosemite Valley or wherever. So this all kind of hangs together. All right? So, just any volunteers, what is your family's personal background on going to parks? Some of us will have gone on, like, the summer family trip. And for some, that's a set of fond memories. And for others, hell. So what's your family background, personally, with going to parks? Some of you guys have never been to a national park, and that's fine. No big deal. Some of you guys have been to a whole bunch of them, maybe even more than me. Anybody?
Like day trips, nothing too intensive.
Day trips, to where?
Maybe Starved Rock or...
State Park? Okay.
Yeah.
Bowden State Park, very cool. All right. Anybody grow up going to the Shawnee?
Shawnee, Crab Orchard.
Shawnee, Crab Orchard, awesome. Giant City? Excellent.
When my mom was pregnant with me, and when I was really early, we lived down here. So when I was really young, we went to a lot of the parks. My mom and my dad meeting.
Okay. So like family trip type stuff?
Yeah.
All right. Down here in Southern Illinois?
Yeah, when we lived here. So
Right on.
like my first 2 years away. It's
Very cool.
mainly the parks.
Anybody ever go on like a big cross-country family trip?
Every summer we try to go on like a 2 weekend, 2 weeks of trip. Just going to like Alaska, Denali National Park.
Okay. All the way up to Denali. Wow. Awesome.
Been to probably 20 national parks so far.
Like which ones?
Uh,
Make us all jealous.
That's the Colorado area, just in the Red Forest, like California, big red trees,
Redwoods? Okay.
redwoods. Montana National Park, Glacier Bay area.
Glacier National Park. Very cool. Literally. All right. So we've got some variety here. And it's going to make a difference. So, for example, a family that is going to Denali and Glacier and the coastal redwoods in Marin County, California, and Sequoia Kings Canyon nearby and all of that, they're going to be sort of not necessarily training those kids in a different direction than somebody who goes to, for example, forest and wildlife refuges, Shawnee, Crab Orchard here in Southern Illinois. But there is an increased likelihood that somebody with more exposure is going to be pretty excited about this stuff and do more trips as an adult, or even, go into something like forestry, park management, or any of the other related land management type fields. So that's a thing. And it makes sense then that if your parents are in a professional role where they're making more than median income, so there's a lot of blue collar jobs that make a ton of money, as well as professional positions. But the key factor becomes, do you have the scratch? Do you have the kind of job where you get 2 weeks of vacation guaranteed in your contract every year, and the pay to back up a trip to use those 2 weeks as vacation, instead of like, man, we got to fix our roof, so I'm going to take this Friday off and next Friday off and the Friday after that until our roof's fixed, and not go on a family vacation. Okay? So these things determine the makeup of your family, determines a lot the patterns that you're exposed to early in life have a huge effect. If your parents are into hunting, you're way, way, way more likely to survive the zombie apocalypse, but also to enjoy hunting recreationally on your own once you're an adult. And that kind of makes sense. If you're just not exposed to that stuff, or if guns are coded as kind of a negative thing in your family's culture, then you're not likely at all to be trying to take advantage of those recreation opportunities in a national park or elsewhere. Okay? So, family background has a huge, huge kind of almost steering level effect on how you, as a recreationist, do the rest of your life. It's not 100%, right? So most of our parents are not into rock climbing. Rock climbing is relatively young as an outdoor recreation activity and is much more available to this generation than any previous generation in all of human history. So your family background matters a lot less for that one. Does that make sense? All right, so that's demographics. Demographics. We want to know what are the demographics of the people showing up at your park. And then we kind of take those proportions of folks who are more likely to be into rock climbing, more likely to want to enjoy hunting or fishing, more likely to want glamping instead of camping versus staying at a lodge or like a Motel 6, because that's how you think of parks. A lot of people think of parks from the window of their motel for a lot of reasons. Let's see. After demographics, we want to think about kind of all of those demographics collected together in terms of how they actually came together in typically your childhood, especially your early childhood, and kind of flow together to write the story of your childhood with respect to forest and outdoor recreation. So this is a thing called place attachment and place bonding. We want to know if any of our visitors, as a function of who they are, what they were exposed to, how many times they visited your park in the past, for example, what they could afford to do, what they were interested in doing, what they felt safe doing at your park in these past trips. All of those kind of roll together into this thing, place attachment. Other researchers call something very similar place bonding. And it kind of shows up when you get to talk to some of your visitors a little bit more as a ranger at the information desk, or if you're an interpretive ranger and you're giving an evening talk and you're just getting to know your visitors that evening. So you say, hey, where's everybody coming from? Is anybody back here at Mammoth Cave National Park? Is this your 10th visit? And somebody will laugh in the audience and be like, son, I live just over that hill yonder. This is my 380th trip to Mammoth Cave. Like, get on my level, scrub. They wouldn't say that. Well, sometimes they say that. But anyway, what's your personal connection to any particular place? Is there a spot that when somebody says, so what's your favorite national park? It's a question that I get very commonly. It's difficult for me to answer because I love all the parks like I love my wife. Does anybody have a place that springs to mind in terms of like ideal trip? You've got the cash, you got the time, you got the gear. Where are you going? Is it a place that you've been to before that you feel some attachment to? Anybody?
For me, I mean, at least in the area that I always like going to is Crop Orchard. I mean, I was an intern there, but I also grew up going there.
Okay.
It was really interesting. When I was a kid, there was a butterfly roundup program. I have a photo of me when I was a little kid, like pulling the net and everything. And then growing up and becoming an intern there, I was able to help out with that program. And it's just, I've always had an importance. I've always loved the refuge.
Very cool.
Area.
Okay. So Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge. Now here's a follow-on question. When you say Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge, which actual part of it, which site or location actually pops up in your mind's eye? Is it a visitor center? Is it like a short interpretive trail? Is it way off in the middle of the woods, standing next to one of those super sketchy General Dynamics ammo plants?
Honestly, in the middle of the restricted area, there's one area I really like going to, like during, like when I was working there and like on the discovery tours, Bald Eagle tours. There's like this area you can flip on this hill and you can look out at like where there's all kinds of waterfowl and
Okay.
bald eagles nest out in the trees. It's really nice.
All right. That's very cool. I'd like to see that spot one day. Anybody else? Is there a specific place that if I canceled class and handed you $1,000, you know you're going there? It doesn't have to be a park. You don't have to like say an answer you think I will like. Like, it might be your backyard. Does that make sense? It might be a swimming hole in a creek that's like on your neighbor's property, but they don't know you know about it. Anybody?
I'd probably go to the North Cascades.
North Cascades. That's a pretty big area. So what do you mean when you say North Cascades?
I mean, all I know, I don't know, like, the different parts of it, but I definitely know, like, just the whole picture of it. And that'd be something I'd like to see in
Okay.
person.
Very cool.
Definitely the Blue Mountains. It's like, or, I mean, it's like they are.
A specific range
Mhm.
in the Cascade. All right. Anybody else?
Not really a specific park or an area but one of the big trips I'd like to go on, and especially some of my friends that we want to go to Maine.
Okay.
Visit, see all the national parks there.
Why Maine?
Um,
That's very specific.
it just seems like a very nice place with a lot of the temperature that we both all of us like, and it just, compared to what I've dealt with my entire life, it's completely different, and I just think that'd be a nice change of pace compared to, when you think of all my friends who have gone places have always gone south. I've never been a fan of that. Like, go north.
Okay, right on. So let's talk about Maine for a second. Because I have some place attachment or some place bonding, depending on how you define it all, with some spots in Maine. So the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail is at the highest peak in Maine, 5,000 something feet. It is Mount Katahdin. And Maine's generally pretty flat. It's a land of like 10,000 lakes, but they're all just beaver ponds. And it's all super flat, and you can't drink any of the water without having like insane explosive diarrhea. It's all just like beaver poop everywhere, all day, all night. And then like the northern tip of the Appalachians pokes over from the White Mountains in New Hampshire next door, and kind of in a bunch of different like bunny slope tail end of a ridge ends at Mount Katahdin, and then Mount Katahdin is this big sort of point on the exclamation point going northward. That's where I finished the Appalachian Trail, hiking that through hike right after I graduated college, and that's a very meaningful spot for me. That was a long time ago, and I can remember clear as day the specific colors in the birch trees that were around our campsite before we made our summit attempt. I remember the specific foods that we ate after in celebration. I remember specifically how each person smelled on that trip. Like, that place is indelibly etched into my memory. We'll come back to that in a sec. Another place in Maine that I have a lot of place attachment to is Acadia National Park. I did several summers of research there as a graduate student. I know that island like the back of my hand. We got to know a bunch of the rangers there really, really well. They showed us some sides of the island that they don't normally show to most visitors. And that makes it feel a little bit more special. You get like a backstage pass or tour, climbing the Beehive Cliffside Trail over the Atlantic Ocean under a full moon with like the chief recreation person, and he's telling you about like, okay, so you see that little faint line on the rock over there? That's an old trail built by the Civilian Conservation Corps that nobody knows about. Let's go check it out. Under the full moon and the Atlantic Ocean and like whales spouting and breaching. It's amazing. I remember how the air felt and smelled on that nighttime hike. I'm attached to that place. It's also where I asked Sweet Emmy to be my girlfriend, so that's cool. That worked out. We have a lot of pictures of that particular spot on Cadillac Mountain. Like, that matters to me. All right? So the point of place attachment, and really the point of knowing what kinds of place attachment, what intensity of place attachment, what sites carry those connections among your visitors, as the park ranger or the park superintendent, park planner for the semester, is folks get pretty invested in some of these spots that, you get your job at the Cascades or Roosevelt or Isle Royal or wherever, and you move up there for the summer to do your first temp seasonal thing, and these people got history with this place. They have some typically opinions on how it should look when they come back for their next trip, because they're specifically excluding everywhere else they could go, and they're coming back to this one because it's special. They're going back to that vista spot here in southern Illinois, or up to Maine because it's got a specific climate that is not what all those other lame folks who went south are gonna get to experience and enjoy. There's not that particular spot on the mountainside where I got to ask my wife to be my girlfriend before I got to ask her to be my wife. And if they change how they manage that spot, I'm gonna be pissed. Like a lot. Like a lot. Like race, like country song level mad, you know? And
It's pretty mad.
and I don't have any right to. Except that I have every right to. Does that make sense? It sounds like a paradox, right? This land is your land, this land is mine. These are public lands. These are managed for us. Which is also to say that they're managed for us. Like, we don't necessarily get to, as the recreationists, make those tough trade-off choices in land management. So, for example, the dwarf shrubland blueberry bald subalpine complex ecosystem at the top of Cadillac Mountain at Acadia National Park has spots of open granite where you can sit and watch the sunset and have lobster you caught that day off of a tourist lobster boat, and ask somebody to be your girlfriend because of the fire suppression regime on the island. And other things, but specifically that. And because the Park Service made a choice to run a road up to the top of that mountain and build the parking lot at the top of the mountain such that it can accommodate Greyhound-sized buses off of the cruise ships that come through. So thousands of people a day are up on this summit. And when you have thousands of people on a small area, like a mountain summit is geographically a small spot because it's, the rest of it is steep. People are going to naturally kind of spread out from one another. You don't want other people in your bubble, especially if you're trying to have a serious conversation and ask somebody to be your girlfriend. So people spread out, and in the process of spreading out, they trample that dwarf, shrub, subalpine, blueberry bald complex ecosystem. And low bush blueberry, wild blueberries are low woody shrubs, usually 12 to 18 inches high, maybe a couple of meters at the most, and very easy to sort of crash on through it to get to an open spot on the other side. The soil up there is like a fraction of a centimeter thick in most places, real thin lenses of just decomposed granite. It looks like gravel or sand more than it looks like soil, so people don't realize how fragile that ecosystem is. And the Park Service has made some management choices, and they've been tweaking their approach over time to try and limit the amount of soil erosion and vegetation trampling up on that summit because it's been intensively used by thousands of people 7 days a week during peak season for over the last 100 years. So it's pretty beat up. And some of those beat up spots are those open chunks of granite where you can sit down and have a quiet moment with your significant other and ask them to be your girlfriend or boyfriend or person friend. It's 2021. I don't even know what terms you guys use. Anyway. So if they change their management plan and their on-site management presence at Acadia National Park, specifically Cadillac Mountain, and we go back there when we're old and gray in our robotic wheelchairs, and we can't go back to the spot where it all started, romantically, for your nerdy professor, I'm gonna be pissed. Because we had a good thing going, Acadia National Park management staff. Why'd you have to go and fuck it up? Pardon my French. But people do get really mad about this stuff. And they'll say some pretty unchristian things if they disagree with your management approach when they have the background and the basis to understand that something has changed. If it's your first time there, you don't know, right? The underlying unconscious assumption is, well, it's always been kind of like this, The Park Service does preservation. So however it looks is probably pretty close to how it's always kind of looked, at least in Western American culture post 1750. And cool. Thanks for putting a road up to the top. Could have been a long hike, and we wouldn't have had any gas left for, holding hands up at the top. So, place attachment, place bonding, it's more than just like each visitor's kind of previous history and story. It's also how much you have a thing called centrality associated with specific sites inside of your national park that you're trying to manage. So, for example, that spot on top of Cadillac is super important for me. 500 meters in any direction, same mountaintop, or same mountain slopes, I guess, 500 meters. And I don't care. Whatever. Close that area off from hiking. I don't mind. Whatever. I just want to get back to that spot. Okay? So, that's a thing called centrality, where your conception of who you are and what made you who you are, your experiences, the things you've been exposed to, the people that you met on some of these trips, the relationships that you forged or strengthened or blew apart on some of these trips. Those experiences tied to those places are part of what make you who you are, right? So this gets into that whole nature versus nurture, how do we become who we are kind of thing. And this is firmly on the nurture side. That is, you don't care about any particular spot at Acadia National Park until you see the postcard, and that makes you save up some money, and then you go on the trip, and then you bring somebody that you think is pretty cool on the trip, and then you become like a thing, and so forth, and on down the line. So, centrality. To what extent do any of your visitors kind of define themselves or understand they are who they are because of a place that you're managing? And without asking any of these questions, you have no idea. We'll have some pretty pissed off people. At C&O Canal National Historic Park, a lot of people have at least some place attachment to C&O Canal National Historic Park because there are a bunch of neighborhoods right next door, and a lot of people walk their dogs there over their lunch break or in the morning or in the evening. And we were trying to help them with closing a very dangerous set of visitor-created trails along the Billy Goat Section A trail on Bear Island there. Very, very popular trail, hundreds of thousands of visitors a year. And we found that for certain spots, closing off some of those side trails that visitors had created to walk their dogs was an absolute 100% guaranteed waste of Park Service time and money and so forth. Because if you close down those trails, they can't walk their dog there when the Potomac is flooded. So visitors created those trails, they keep them open. If you do intensive on-site renaturalization work and site ruination to make those trails unwalkable, they'll undo all that and keep walking their dog through. And a few of them, as it turns out, will actually report back to the Park Service and say, yeah, someone closed down a section of the trail, so we went ahead and reopened it for you. You're welcome. It's some free labor, free trail work. And it's like, no, we just spent a bunch of your tax money closing that off, but thanks, now we're going to do it again. So place attachment and how folks see their identity relative to a place is a big deal. Now, not everybody does this. A little bit later, we're going to talk about experience use history as a way of understanding how people see themselves as recreationists and how they sort of accrue different kinds of experiences and how to manage that. Some people we'll talk about collectors. Like they go to all 400 plus units of the national park system once. They don't want to go anyplace twice. They want to have that sense of accomplishment, that sense of well-traveledness, of filling in all the check boxes across the entire map of, I've been to all of them. Got to catch them all, right? Nobody here has ever spent too much money or time on Pokemon Gold, Silver, White, Black, Red, Blue, Yellow, emerald, diamond, sapphire, chrysanthemum, Yankees, Red Sox, whatever. Like, there's a million different versions of Pokemon, right? And there's just this instinct to try and catch them all, which is a pretty good marketing slogan when you think about it. But collectors, if your park is full of collectors and that's all, you can probably feel like you have the latitude to do what you need to do as a park land manager, because they're all only ever going to be there once, and the conditions they experience that time are going to define that whole trip, and they're never going to come back. So if you change something, they're not likely to get mad about it because they will never know about it. If you have a whole bunch of locals, for example, going to Crab Orchard or the Shawnee or Giant City State Park over and over and over from the time that you could walk or before you were born up until the day that you die, those folks are going to notice every little change. And that's generally a very positive thing. That's good. You want folks coming back. That's a mark of success. But it can make some of your valid management options a little bit less popular, or a lot less popular, to the point that people are purposefully undoing land management efforts that you do to close down harmful trails, for example, in the presence of endangered species. Okay? Cool. So, place attachment, place bonding. Take a moment to, again, think about, are there any places that I think about like that? Like, when I think about any of the influential seasons of my life, are they tied to a natural area? Are any of them tied to kind of a trip that is famous in your family for being a total calamity, but it was awesome? Or it was just an amazing trip. Yeah, we had a great time. It was wonderful. I went to the Niagara Falls one time with a friend of mine's girlfriend's family. I was the awkward third wheel, but we were all too young to understand it, and it was fine. And that was kind of a fine trip. It was fun. It was whatever. I was young, but I don't have any real personal attachment to it because I was just there once as a kid, and I don't have any plans to go back. It was fine. It was whatever. It was, as the Simpsons might say, meh. You know, Niagara Falls, like one of the biggest waterfalls in the world. It's meh, whatever. Because I don't have any personal attachment there. Folks who went there on their honeymoon, totally different story, right? If the Maiden of the Mists, that ship that goes right up to the base of the falls and you get soaked from all the spray and all that, if they change their prices a lot, or they don't get as close, or not able to get a ticket whatsoever when you're going back for your 25-year wedding anniversary or something like that, that seriously degrades that second trip because things have changed quite a bit. All right? So when things change on site in a negative way, that's called product shift. The experience that people are coming back for has shifted over time to something it wasn't. So if you build up a park too much, you civilize it too much, you tame it too much, you make it too, well, park-like instead of wild, that can be one form of product shift, even though those are generally valid management goals to try and make things safer or more developed or easier to access, whatever. If a place burns to the ground completely, total stand replacement, wildfires, and so forth over time because your fuel management policies let too much build up and too much ladder firing happening and stuff like that, product shift, as well as ecosystem balance and function shifts quite a bit. But from the human perception side, the human experience side, the quality experience side, product shift is generally seen as a very, very powerfully negative thing because it's almost impossible to go back to something that somebody was hoping for having shifted meaningfully in some direction. Okay. So, driving through Rocky Mountain National Park, for me personally, on summer camp this past summer, was heartbreaking. Because all I could see was the western part that was burned to the ground. And all the rest of Rocky Mountain National Park, totally fine. Like, it still looks awesome. The elk are awesome. The caribou are awesome. And hiking the Keyhole route up Longs Peak is awesome. But all I could see was the burned out part. that's product shift. Okay? And that fire started outside of the park and then burned its way through about half of the park. Pretty big change. And it happened just a couple of months before we were there, so it was still pretty stark on the landscape. Everything's all black and charred, and some of the entrance facilities were kind of melted. Product shift. Bad thing. All right? And that sense of product shift all comes from, or the intensity of the badness of product shift heavily depends on things like place attachment. How much do you care about a certain spot? All right? Or how much do your visitors care about certain spots that you are managing from the manager's side? Does everybody kind of get place attachment and then product shift? We'll talk about product shift again a little bit later. Talking about displacement, product shift, and rationalization, but that's, again, a little bit later. Let's take a quick break. We're a little bit past the top of the hour, and almost there. And this is a good moment to kind of stretch your legs and so forth. As you're doing that, I encourage you to think back about a fun, formative experience, Wildlands trip of any kind. Where might you be place attached to? Where might you be heartbroken if it got, even in a managed controlled burn, just look really different? We'll see you in a couple minutes. All right, so after basic demographics, age structure, race, ethnicity, primary language spoken, stuff like that, socioeconomic status, what zip code do you come from, all these things are kind of interrelated. They help determine each other, and education level, that sort of thing. And place bonding and place attachment as a function of all those things coming together to kind of write your early developmental history and experiences in places that are meaningful to you. We want to think ahead to specialization. So this is looking less at where somebody's coming from and much more closely at the stuff that they brought and where they're going to do much more specific things inside your park versus kind of Jack or Jill, average, camper who again doesn't exist. So we can think of every recreationist coming in through your front gates or in through your porous outer perimeter. Most of these parks are not fenced off, as somewhere on a spectrum of not at all specialized, like using the wrong gear straight up, or unwise gear. Maybe there's no wrong gear, but just less or more wise gear, perhaps. All the way up to this person is a world-class, literal professional competitor in that outdoor activity. So think about, in your mind's eye, visitors to Yosemite National Park. Now, if you've never been there, it's just a name, right? So there's a bunch of really sort of mountainous high country. And that's almost all wilderness, designated wilderness inside the national park. And then there's Yosemite Valley, a U-shaped, glacially sculpted valley with some cliffs that are famous. They're granite. They're very, very steep and flat and angular walled. They're perfect for certain very specific kinds of rock climbing and so forth. And then kind of the third big area of focus at Yosemite National Park is Mariposa Grove, which has some pretty gigundous trees. So, most folks through the front gate at Yosemite National Park at El Portal, California, the tiny little gateway town, are going to be generally pretty low on the specialization end of things. Now, granted, I'm talking about this from a filter of kind of Western, medium to high socioeconomic status level of privilege. So let's just acknowledge that and get that out of the way. If you make 25 to 30 grand per year in the United States, like just above poverty level in the United States, that puts you in the top 1% of earners globally. So here we think about the socioeconomic scale with a different bottom end of the scale than most other folks will ever experience, okay? So, somebody showing up at Yosemite National Park in the first place is already doing pretty okay. They've got surplus money, they've got surplus time, and surplus health, if you want to think of it that way, to be there in the first place. Now, beyond that, we have everybody, or almost everybody, being pretty ratchet basic. They're going to stay at a local motel, maybe if they got a little bit more money in one of the nice lodges, maybe a little bit less money in one of the tent city, not quite a glamping level tent, but a semi-permanent canvas tent on a wood platform kind of a setup. If they're looking to save a little bit of money beyond that, they're going to be in one of the many campgrounds in the valley in their own, family size or smaller tent, and probably going to be there for anywhere from a long weekend if they're coming up from Sacramento up to about a 2-week trip for somebody who's really planning on landing at Yosemite and doing some high country hikes and some wall watching, maybe some rock climbing, definitely checking out Mariposa Grove. Like, they're here to capture the whole thing. All right? So, for most of these folks, we consider them fairly low specialization users. They're not highly experienced backcountry travelers. They're not here for the wilderness specifically. They're coming at this with relatively inexperienced or fresh eyes. What they see is what they assume is kind of present. And then a few of their users are showing up to be world-class folks. So there's a series of rock climbs at Yosemite National Park that they're very difficult, so-called multi-pitch climbs. So you do a section of the climb, and you get to a ledge, and you pull up your rope and so forth. You sort of gather all your gear, you get that all back, and then you do the next pitch, and then the next one after that, and then you top out at the top of this, 1,500-foot or 2,000-foot high vertical granite wall. There's several of these walls, and one of the most famous is called El Capitan, the captain. And there's a couple of specific ways up that rock face that are very, very famous. They're known all the world over, in the same way that there's a couple of ways to hike to the top or climb to the top of Mount Everest. And yeah, you could theoretically go a bunch of different ways, but practically speaking, you're limited to a couple of choices. And you need to spend a lot of money, about $75,000 in cash. And for rock climbers, this place is sort of a mecca. That is to say, it's sort of a cultural center around which you'll see a lot of climbers congregating, not just at Yosemite National Park, not just in the valley, but at a specific campground in the valley close to El Capitan called, anybody know which camp it is? Anybody been there? Any gonzo rock climbers? All right. It's called Camp 4. And it's just like all the other campgrounds, but that's the one that the climbers know about because it's close to the super awesome rock climbing sites. And out of the tiny, tiny percentage of all the visitors that come to Yosemite that are rock climbers and there to rock climb, a tiny percentage of that tiny percentage are the ones who can manage that multi-pitch, very, very demanding, difficult, exhausting climb up the face of El Capitan. This is the kind of climb that a lot of people, it's on their bucket list. This is something I'd like to do before I die, if I can, before my body wears out, sort of a thing. And most folks will not ever get the chance to check it off their bucket list because it is an absolutely insane gonzo short list of hikes or climbs. Now, out of a fraction of a percent that's going to climb El Capitan, only a few, count them on one or two hands, have ever free soloed El Cap. Do we have any climbers who know what free soloing is? So that's the free part. Free soloing is climbing without protection. There's no ropes to catch you. There's no nets to catch you. The only thing that is going to catch those hands on the way down is the granite rubble pile at the bottom, the alluvial fan. The solo part of it is you don't have any buddies saying, all right, move your left leg about 11 centimeters towards the left, and then it's not even any kind of a juggy handle, but you got this tiny little, it's about a 2-finger grip, definitely a one knuckler. You have to figure it all out yourself, or scout it over and over and over until you literally memorize the little bumps in the rock for 1,500 to 2,000 feet, one after the other, and then do it. It gets really hot and exposed and windy and loud. Imagine the echo plane of all the jackhammering road work on Yosemite's roads and people laughing and playing in the meadows down below, watching you climb and so forth. It gets, everybody vote Joseph, who's a Viking. It gets really intense up on the rock. And if you are free soloing, you don't have a bunch of extra weight in the form of water and sunblock and stuff like that. So you might be doing a lot of this climb at night with a headlamp, and that's it, to minimize every possible ounce, like cutting the strap off of your headlamp and tying a single line of dental floss to cut that fraction of an ounce off the weight that your body has to manage for 1,500 to 2,000 unprotected vertical feet. It takes a very special kind of person to not only want to and commit to and successfully free solo El Cap, but even to know that that's a thing. Does that make sense? So it's not that everybody else is a filthy casual, it's that all the rest of us, like, that's what we can achieve, that's what we're happy with, we're good to go. Like, I'm happy camping in a tent city tent in Yosemite Valley because I'm in Yosemite Valley. I don't have to measure myself against the success criterion for my trip of free soloing El Cap, and I will never do that. Let's not kid anybody. I'm built like a hobbit, not like an Alex Honnold, okay? And out of that fraction of a percent of a fraction of a percent of a fraction of a percent that's going to free solo El Cap, even fewer folks are going to try to do it to beat a record. So there are several documentaries out there. You can Google them if you want. They're pretty interesting. But for certain people, forest and outdoor recreation means being the world record fastest climber, male or female, unassisted, free climber up El Cap. And sometimes it comes down to like minutes and seconds. It's pretty close. Like, there's just some hard limits on how fast you can spider monkey your way up a rock face. So we're kind of assuming that there's not a ton of specialized people at that end of the spectrum. But that's not always a true assumption, because technology can change the accessibility of what used to be inaccessibly difficult or remote or dangerous. Somebody invents a new kind of, quick wicking rock climbers underwear, and all of a sudden you get folks who are going a little bit farther, a little bit faster, a little bit lighter, and doing climbs that nobody has ever been physically able to do before. So it's a moving target. So in terms of understanding our visitors and why they are arriving and why they have the gear that they have and so forth and what they're planning to do, a lot of that can be explained by very quickly identifying how specialized is this person in the primary activity that you're coming in. So somebody who's just there for a week for the first time to just kind of, do the filthy cash thing and camp and experience Yosemite, we're going to do a little bit of walking, a bit of hiking, a little bit of eating, a little bit of, not rock climbing, but maybe a little bit of rock scrambling, and being like, take a picture of me on this boulder, and it's like 5 feet off the edge of the trail, but it's framed so it looks like you've climbed a mountain. We've all taken that picture. I've taken that picture. You guys are actual rock climbers, whatever. Anyway, don't judge me. And then we get the advent of stuff like lithium batteries and GoPros and drones and lightweight synthetic climbing ropes, static line versus dynamic line, and all sorts of aircraft aluminum alloy or titanium alloy or steel alloy. Climbing gear protection and sport routes take climbers on a lot of climbing routes that were literally physically impossible for a trad climber hammering in pitons, little metal spikes, and hooking their gear onto that. If you can rock drill those bolts onto a rock face, you can do completely different climbs than somebody else. Okay? So, think in your group, what are not necessarily what the most popular activities on site are at your park, but the ones requiring the most specialization. If you're a flat, small island park, you just don't have any rock to climb. So you're not worried about rock climbers taking a whipper onto the rock and injuring themselves. You don't necessarily need to have a high-angle climbing rescue team. Some of the very best climbers in the world rescue the rock climbers who are attempting insane stuff like free soloing El Cap. Okay? Imagine how good you gotta be to pull somebody off the rock safely and yourself off the rock without killing both of you. Okay, so Grand Teton is home to a high-angle rescue climbing crew in the National Park Service, and so is Yosemite, and they are extremely elite. So, again, not what's the most popular, because highly specialized people draw attention to themselves, sometimes on purpose, because they're sponsored by Red Bull and they're trying to get everybody's eyes on the Red Bull logo on their Spanx or across their shirt or whatever. We're viral marketed pretty heavily in outdoor rec by companies like Red Bull specifically. And some of them, they're just doing something that most of us didn't even know was possible, or we recognize that it's extremely risky or rare. And so somebody climbing, not even necessarily free soloing, but just climbing El Cap at all, will gather crowds of up to hundreds of people in the meadows below. And in so doing, cause lots and lots of trampling impacts in the meadow below, and the climber isn't anywhere near that meadow. They're a half mile away up on the rock face. Okay? Does that make sense? So, high specialization users tend to strongly influence and guide and move other users around, sometimes in unforeseen ways. A colleague of mine named Yufei Lung at the North Carolina State University Rec Ecology Lab did a bunch of really cool studies mapping the informal trails and the trampling impacts and the impacts to ant colonies that live in that area, based on people wanting to just watch rock climbers do their thing. I mean, can you imagine going to a park and watching somebody else do something? I mean, now the answer to that question is yes. Like, we have streamers, and we have OnlyFans and Patreon and stuff like that. Like, we pay people to do interesting stuff while we sit there on our couches and watch them play video games and stuff, whatever, I don't know. But that's a thing in outdoor rec, too, and it leads to very characteristic impacts in specific spots. One of the ways in which high specialization users occasionally cause some problems for park managers like you and me this semester is things like base jumping. So it'd be sick to full send the El Cap multi-pitch climbing route and then pop off a road flare, jump off the top of El Cap, and fly in a wingsuit down into the valley, and everybody would see me. That would be so cool. That would be awesome. And so we have experienced alpinists and rock climbers and base jumpers like Dean Potter doing exactly that, and then experiencing a physical high-speed come apart with rapid unplanned disassembly colliding with something on the way down. So, you know, you sign on as a park ranger at Yosemite, and you're ready to go out and hike some trails and help some people with twisted ankles, and one day the call goes out, hey, you know, bring your spill kit, we just found Dean Potter's body, right? And we've got some examples, I can post them on the course website if you want, of base jumpers doing, disallowed base jumps in national parks and crashing fatally, but their GoPros stay running, and so you get a front row seat to someone's last moments, and it's pretty horrific. And that's not the kind of experience, that's not the life way that we're about curating as rangers in the Park Service, right? So occasionally high specialization users, because they're pushing so far against the risk, the survivability envelope, the is it even possible envelope of human experience, they can have a very, very, even though there's just a couple of them, a disproportionate amount of effort and cost and risk exposure to you if you're going out on search and rescue to retrieve somebody whose base jump went wrong, or whose non-permitted climb went wrong, or something like that. Okay, so let's take about 5-10 minutes to think through the list of kind of very high specialization outdoor and forest rec activities that folks might want to do at your park based on topography, base jumping, more extreme rock climbing, sport climbing with more dynamic moves where you're like jumping from one set of holds to another, versus static climbing where it's like 3 points of contact and one reaching at all times kind of thing. Okay? It may be a land-based thing. It may be an air-based thing like base jumping. It may be a water-based thing. It may be subterranean. So cavers are super gonzo outdoor recreation explorers, mapping new cave connections and stuff like that. We'll learn a whole lot more about that at Mammoth Cave, but don't just concentrate on the flashy ones jumping through the sky, popping road flares and stuff like that. Okay? Take about 10 minutes. Talk about what might be, for highly specialized users, more attractive at your park. So think of any activity taken to the nth degree. What is an extremely specialized person who enjoys fishing into? Probably a very specific kind of fishing, probably a very specific, limited, high-quality set of fish of a very specific, desirable species, and nothing else matters. All of the other possible fish that they could catch on a regular, less skilled fishing trip are considered the trash mobs to somebody who is into a very specific kind of brook or rainbow trout fly fishing, for example. So, talk with your group members. What are the high specialization ones that might have an outsized impact on your park management? At your park specifically, based on the resources present?